So, welcome everybody. We are first of all very sorry that there were some technical issues and we had to start a bit later, and the talk will be without slides, I mean with slides, but by using handouts instead of the screen here. So our apologies for that. And then I want to say that it's a great pleasure to introduce you to Pilar Terrés, who was working here for 2 years during COVID times. And it's great to have her back to give a talk and to hear about her recent work. And so, well, where's yours?
Thanks. Okay, thanks a lot. Thanks for inviting me. It's really nice. It's a really pleasure to be back in Louvain-la-Neuve and see that things are as they were. So it's really no, it's really nice to be here. So just to give a bit of context and background about this talk. So this is work in progress, and it's part of a more broad view on language and on logical vocabulary, but I will not focus here on logical vocabulary. You will see why, and you will see the connection. So I've been working for some time on non-classical logics and on the connection between philosophy of language, philosophy of logic, and on the meaning of logical connectives, let's say, in different logics, non-classical logics. So the view in which this talk is, so the schema that this is in the background of this talk is a kind of pluralistic view on languages. And it focuses on a very particular problem that we have once we have this kind of pluralistic view, which I want to defend. So let's just start with with some intuitions, some quotes, which frame a bit the debate. So first is things that I will not argue for, but things that are supposed. One is this pluralistic, tolerant view on language that we have from Carnap, but then has been repeated and has been defended by others, in which, I will just read part of this quote. So Carnap defends that for logical connectives and for the vocabulary, we don't start from a semantics, the meaning of, let's say, conjunction, and from the meaning of conjunction that could correspond to the truth tables, we derive some rules for reasoning with it, but it goes the other way around. First we have some rules and those rules define the meaning of the logical constants. And not only this, but we can be tolerant about different sets of rules. So he says, let any postulates and any rules of inference be chosen arbitrarily. Then this choice, whatever it may be, will determine what meaning is to be assigned to a fundamental logical symbols. Then can be summarized in a more recent work by Jared Warren. It says, meanings are cheap. Any collection of inference rules can be used for an expression. Any inference rules that can be used for an expression can, in principle, be meaning determining for the expression. So this is the background, but then we have the following puzzle. And the puzzle comes from this tolerance towards rules to concept possession. So let's assume this view on what it means, what it is to possess a concept. So I'm going to read the quote, I think it's illuminating. The characteristic doctrine of the 20th century philosophy of mind and language was that concept possession is some sort of dispositional epistemic condition. Maybe it's some sort of knowing that, or maybe it's some sort of knowing how, or maybe a bit of both. In any case, knowing, believing, and the like must come into the story somewhere. And what you have to know in order to have a concept, ipso facto constitute the concept's content. That seems commonsensical, and it works for concepts like wine. Let's have a person, Otto, and we say about him that he possesses the concept of wine if he applies it correctly to the result of fermenting grape juice, or if offered with a glass of wine, he derives that he's offered some kind of alcoholic drink, etc. But then we have the following problem. We can have a concept like bind, introduced by David Liggins in his late book about truth. We will see how this talk connects also to the work of Liggins indirectly, because he defends that the concept of truth is a concept that is also inconsistent, like the concepts that we will study here, but I will not focus on truth. But the example he puts for an inconsistent concept would be something like this. Bind applies to X if X is wine, and bind doesn't apply to X if X is British. So he possesses the concept of bind if he applies it correctly to a bottle of Chapel Down, which is a British wine, or if when someone offers him a glass of wine, he derives that this is not a non-British wine, etc. So with inconsistent concepts, if we have this simple view on what is to possess a concept, we will end up accepting things that one doesn't want to accept. So this is the puzzle, and these are the aims of the talk. First, I will explore the different examples that have been in the literature that have been given to illustrate this kind of concepts. Then I will analyze which kind of common feature is in all of them. I will present the problems that those concepts pose to the notion of concept possession. I'll suggest an alternative view that solves the problems, or that I would like to say that solves the problems, and then two very short appendices to the content. That is, given that the inconsistent concepts will include slurs, I will say something about the philosophical consequence for the slurs, and also I will very briefly discuss whether truth could be also integrated in this picture or not, given that at least for me this research started reading about truth as an inconsistent concept, going to the illustrations that the authors that claim that truth is an inconsistent concept give, and then focus only on those concepts and forgetting about truth, but then I will come back to truth to say something. So first part, so we have let's say we have a concept P, and we defend that we have for P some constitutive principles that define it, and are those kind of things that you should accept in order to possess understand the concept. And then an inconsistent concept is a concept whose constitutive principles entail that P, and P is not the case. It's not a concept that is intrinsically contradictory or inconsistent in itself, but with something that is outside of the concept. It's in the world. It's something that is not the case in the world. And now we will see some examples that I hope will illuminate this. So the first illustration is this by Gupta, in which he imagines this Hegelian community, which can have the following capacity. So they can distinguish situations in which one object is exactly above another object. Object A is above object B. And they can also distinguish, they can see when two objects have the line that connects two objects is parallel to a designated line that they have in their surface. They can do these two things. And they also have the concept up above, which applies to an ordered pair AB if either one of the two things happen. Both A or B are perceived as in the first situation, that one is just on top of the other, or if the line connecting them is parallel to the designated ray. And this does not apply if one of these two things is not the case. So the consequence is that the concept is only consistent if they live on a flat surface. In any other case, they will derive things that are not true, because they will derive that those two lines, that A and B is on top of the other, but they will say then it's parallel to this ray, but it's not the case. So they use the concept in a way that if they live in a non-flat surface, the concept is inconsistent. although they might not know. We don't know anything about whether they live in this surface or not, but if they could, the concept would be inconsistent. There's Kevin Scharp, who also argued the truth is an inconsistent concept, said that those examples are not only made-up examples by philosophers, but also Newtonian mass was an inconsistent concept because it confused two different things. So we have so in the Newtonian mechanics, we have two ways of introducing, or at least one way of introducing mass and then eliminating the concept. So first we can say that non-kinetic energy divided by the velocity of light, so the square of velocity of light, is mass, and then this is constant in all reference frames. So given this elimination, so if something is mass, then we can derive that is constant in all reference frames. This is not the case. This is not the case. So the Newtonian mass was an inconsistent concept, and we still understand and have this concept and understand what it means. So it's meaningful for us. And then just a very brief annotation here. So it's not the same. Someone could say, well, in the case of mass, it's inconsistent. It's just an empty concept. We discovered that something like Newtonian mass doesn't exist, doesn't refer to anything. Here, just a very, very simple clarification. So an empty concept doesn't need to be inconsistent, or it's not inconsistent. For instance, a squircel, x, let's say that x is a squircel if and only if x is circular and a square. It's not inconsistent, just empty. However, if we assume that being squircel is the only way for being either circular or square, then we really confuse the two things. It's not that we have circular things, square things, and some things that are both, which is an empty concept, but just that if something is a square, then it's a squircel, and if it's a squircel, then it's circular. Then that makes the concept inconsistent. And with mass, we have something similar. The introduction rules for mass is that momentum divided velocity, it's enough for saying that this is the mass, and then mass is eliminated, saying that it's constant. So it's an inconsistent. And then just the example of bind that we just saw, which I'll skip. Another typical inconsistent concept would be TONK. Logical connectives can also be inconsistent. So we have the rules for TONK. You introduce TONK as a disjunction and eliminate it as a conjunction, and then you derive from A, derive B for any A and B. And finally, we have slurs. If we have introduction rules for Bosch, like if X is German, then X is Bosch, and if X is Bosch, then X is cruel, then we can derive that Germans are cruel. And in a world in which Germans are not cruel, this is inconsistent, of course. I say this because then we will see how the context is important for this. What can we say about this? Well, we have many different concepts. They come from different domains. But I want to use what has been said for the logical connectives to be applied to the rest of the concepts. And what has been said for the logical connectives is that not any pair of rules for a logical connective will be legitimate, but they have to have some criteria. There has to be something, at least they have to be conservative and unique. We will focus only on the conservativity here, and this is defended by Belknap. Let's just see in the next slide what it is for a connective to be conservative. So we say that a connective is conservative if, when we have a language without the connective, if we add the connective in the language, we cannot derive anything new in the old language without the connective. This doesn't happen with something like TONK. If we have the rules of TONK, if we have a language without TONK in which A entails B cannot be derived, adding something like TONK, as we have here, applying transitivity, applying cut, we have that A entails B, so that would make the connective non-conservative. So they all have the property, a connective, the rules should have, and the connective should have the property of being cut eliminable. So whatever you could derive with the introducing and eliminating the connective is something that you could have derived already without introducing and eliminating the connective. And here we have an illustration. I will not stop here, but we have an illustration of how conjunction is conservative.
Just a quick clarificatory question.
Yes.
So you say above, so like bind fails conservativeness because it lets you all of a sudden conclude that there aren't any British wines?
Yes.
I don't see how the argument goes for that.
It's the connection between having these principles with the concept possession criteria that says that, or let's say that we, or not even, if we have this concept, we introduce the concept in the language. So from X is wine, you derive that is wine, and if something is wine, you derive that is non-British, because the definition of wine works like this.
I see. Okay.
It's the very definition of the concept that allows you to.
I see. Got it. So it's very relevant, and this is why okay, because I understood it perfectly with Newtonian mass, and then I lost it, so I was trying to get it back. This is why it's very important that that's presented as two separate rules and not as a conjunction.
Yes.
If it's a conjunction, then we're fine.
Yes.
If it's a conjunction, then it's. Because I was over here thinking whatever. Médoc is a coherent concept, right? And that's just X is a wine that's from a very particular part of France. That's fine, right? But because there's it's the two separate rules. You need that cause problems. Okay, cool. Now I'm back.
An introduction rule and an elimination rule in which then you cut, and the same
I'm back.
definition. Okay.
Cool, thank you.
So the definition of wine is the thing we see with grapes and so on.
Yes.
And the definition of wine is like basically the same definition plus English from England.
For the definition of wine, we already understand what is wine.
Okay.
Because you need the definition of wine, but for the definition of wine, I was very vague. Whatever you consider that should be included in a definition of wine, let's say that those are the constitutive principles, and someone possesses the concept if uses them. In the case of wine, is a concept that is artificial, but not necessarily, because we have mass, for instance. Well, still artificial, but yeah, it doesn't need to be a concept that is made for being consistent. In the case of wine, it is. But we suppose that we understand what wine is.
So wine is saying it's like wine, but it's from the British Island, and that's the exclusion of it. It's like it's not actually wine is wine, but wine is defined by the fact that it's like wine.
So we could say, someone could say, well, we don't understand what wine is. So wine is the result of fermenting grape juice, which is alcoholic, and everything that you want to add in the definition for what is something to be wine. But also we say that in the definition of wine, if something is wine, then it's not British. It's a legitimate thing. You can say this is the concept I want to put on the table. Okay. Whatever is wine is not British. If I do this, it's not problematic. But if the introduction rules allows you to derive that some British entities fall in the definition of wine, then you derive that those British wines are wine and not wine.
Okay.
Because you can say that they are wine for the introduction rules, but they are not wine because of the elimination rule for wine.
Okay.
And then you have the... So the conclusions for this kind of concepts is two different things. Either the conclusion is there are no British wines. Just by introducing the concept in the language, you can derive that there are no British wines, because whatever is wine is not British. Or that British wines are both wine and not wine.
Okay.
Just to make sure that I understood right, on the first slide where you talk about wine, the third slide I think.
Yes.
There's a typo, right? When someone offers him a glass of wine, he derives that he is offered some non-British drink.
In the case.
Wine.
No. Okay.
Or it's
fine.
already.
No, it's fine. Should be.
Or it's already
yeah,
the consequence.
already there is a transitivity implicit here.
Okay.
He says that, okay, I'm offered something that is wine, that is wine, it's wine, so it's wine, so it's not British.
Right.
Yeah, no, the intention was that it was wine.
I see. So the offering is there not very important.
No.
It's just that he knows that there are no British wines.
Yeah. So it's
Because the offering seems important for the elimination case, because then that you're being offered that linguistically, like, this is fine, so you can conclude that it's not British. But in this case, given that you know from the inconsistent concept itself already that there's no the offering is not important.
No, I was not thinking about what message is transmitted to the person, just that the person sees that he's offered something that looks like wine, so he says that's wine, and if it's wine, then it's not British. It's not that here you have a glass of wine.
Right.
Yeah, it was not so direct, but yeah, it was.
Okay,
And
so
the offering is
that clarifies everything. Thanks.
And it was just that I wanted to put in action the fact that we are talking about what kind of things do we say about someone that understands a concept, that he should do these kind of things.
Yeah. Great.
Okay. So, conservativity is this property in which you don't add a new sequence to your language without the new connective. I will skip the uniqueness condition because it's not important here, so we will focus. So the next slide is not. But just to make more emphasis, so something common in all the illustrations that we saw, and this will be important in the second appendix about the concept of truth, but all these concepts, all these examples, illustrations that we saw have the property of being non-conservative in our world. So we can call them ambiguous, inconsistent concepts. Ambiguity is not the only way that a concept can be inconsistent. Matti Eklund, for instance, that worked on inconsistent concepts, says that vague predicates are also inconsistent because the introduction, rules, and elimination for something like rich or bold allow you to derive something that is not the case, so somehow they are also inconsistent, but they are not ambiguous inconsistent, just consistent. And truth has something, also adding truth to a language allows you to derive a contradiction, which you couldn't derive before, so it's also an inconsistent concept. But those that we saw are inconsistent. Now imagine the following, so the different levels of inconsistency. Imagine now that there are no British wines. So we are in a world, in a situation, could be a world or a situation, I will be vague about this, and then we can ask, is wine defective in this new situation? Someone could say no, because so it's not defective, now it's completely fine. If there are no British wines, the concept is conservative, because we cannot derive something new. On the contrary, someone could say, yes, the concept is still non-conservative because it's not necessary that wine is not British. Just happens that there are no British wines, but because nobody decided to produce them. So with these two different responses, we can distinguish two different levels of inconsistency. One is modal inconsistency, physical, metaphysical, logical, in which wine would be inconsistent even in a world without British wines, because we should only allow concepts in which the introduction and elimination rules allow you to derive things that are necessary, physical, metaphysical, etc., or world inconsistency, in which you do not derive something that is not the case. In that case, wine would be completely fine. And modal consistency would entail world consistency, but not the other way around. And I want to defend, and I will focus on this talk only on world consistent. We will focus only on world consistent and inconsistent concepts. Why? Because I think that situations like the mass example or the situation with the Hegelians that use the concept up above, in which they are in a flat surface, they have nothing problematic. Even if you introduce them, even if you derive something that is not necessary, but you derive something that is the case, so there is nothing problematic here. So I will say that, and given this tolerant view I want to have on concepts and introduction rules, that thing is the more natural position. Okay, now we go to the problem. We have all these concepts, and we want to give criteria for when someone understands a concept. A very simple view, a first introduction, a first approach for concept introduction would be something like, if one possesses a concept, one believes its constitutive principles. However, if this is the case, and assuming that we have now the concept of bind and all the rest, we should also believe that there are no British wines, Newtonian mass is the correct picture of the world, Germans are cruel, or B follows from A for any A and B. So we need to modify CP, concept possession, in order to endorse also the possession of those kind of concepts. And I will present two proposals and the problems that I see on both. So both proposals come from the literature on the concept of truth as inconsistent, but it can also apply to this discussion. So one is Kevin Scharp proposal. He says that for concept possession, we don't need to believe the constitutive principles of the concepts we have. We only have to have quasi-entitlement. So first, what is entitlement? He says is something like justified epistemic warrant. We are entitled to believe that our memory works well, although we might not really believe about it unless someone asks. And then quasi-entitlement is an entitlement that we could have if there was no countervailing evidence against it. So we believe in that our memory works unless we have something that shows that it doesn't. And then he says, now with this notion of quasi-entitlement, we can define concept possession. A subject S possesses the concept C if and only if one is quasi-entitled to its constitutive principles, the constitutive principles for C. Or a subject possesses the concept C if she would be entitled to its constitutive principles provided one had no countervailing evidence. I think this has some counterintuitive consequences. So first, this notion of so if we say the constitutive principles define a concept, then not believing, so if we ask someone, do you believe that, do you have the concept of bind? Yes. Here you have a bottle, do you think that this is bind? No, I don't believe that there is some tension between the two attitudes. But which I think it's more problematic in the next, so that's just a very vague intuition, but what I think it's a bit more problematic for this view is that the distinction between, in order to know if someone has a concept, understands a concept, we evaluate it in a counterfactual situation in which the person wouldn't have the problems. However, this lack of countervailing evidence could also make someone understand the concept. So I think the theory doesn't make a distinction between these two situations that I think that are genuinely distinct. So imagine a dialogue between A and B, is in this box, entitlement, non-entitlement, and someone says, here you have the new concept, it's bind, it applies to wine and does not apply to a British product. And B says, okay, I understand the concept and I understand that it's effective, so I will not derive that this wine is bind. Someone asks, would you derive that it's bind if there were no British wines? In that case, yes. The concept is no more problematic, so I could apply bind normally. So here that would be the ideal picture in Scharp, quasi-entitlement view. However, imagine the following. So B's, here you have the new concept, blah, 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 and B says, well, I'm not sure if I should apply. I'm not sure I really understand this concept. I cannot figure out which kind of things fall under this scope, which don't. I cannot figure out whether this bottle of wine is wine or not. And then someone says, well, imagine that there were not British wines. So, well, in that case, I think I am starting to understand the concept. Given that I understand the concept, now I see I could apply it. Wine would be equivalent to wine. Both situations fall under the scope of quasi-entitlement with this definition, but in one case I would say that there is understanding, and the other there doesn't seem to be understanding. The understanding comes because someone might be incapable of understanding inconsistent concepts, just consistent ones, and then once we have no countervailing evidence, then someone starts to understand. So a second proposal is dispositions. I think this view is much more simple and much more elegant, I would say. Yes?
I'm not sure that I understood actually what makes buying.
Mm-hmm.
That's it.
What can you...
What made buying? Like, what was the characteristic that makes buying?
What?
Like, I see the characteristic of a wine,
Mm-hmm.
and I understand that buying is basically a wine that's not British.
Not really, because it's not in this conjunction. It's not, the definition is not wine that is not British, which is a completely fine concept.
Mm.
But it's not really intuitive because we don't work with this concept, we don't have it in our vocabulary, but just, so given the rules, there is this concept.
Okay.
You see the rules, right? So if you have wine,
yeah.
if you know that something is wine, you have a rule that allows you to conclude that it's wine.
Yeah.
Independent of its origin.
Okay.
That's enough for introducing it.
Uh-huh.
While if you know that something is wine, you're allowed to conclude that it's not British.
Yes, exactly.
Okay.
So that's
But
different from the
it's two
conjunction.
steps. This is exactly the thing that I was confused about before too.
Okay.
It's two separate steps. It's not one combined thing. It's that there's one. First you can make the first step, then you can make the second step.
If it was a conjunction, the first step would not be allowed, because then you would have to know that it's not British too.
Okay.
Yeah.
Now it's already enough that it's wine.
Okay, I can deduce that it's buying, and then from the fact that it's buying, I can induce also that then it's not an English thing.
Yeah.
Oh, okay, right. I see.
Right.
And I'm going to use this doubt also to put more emphasis, so I'm using the example of wine because it's very simple, but to fix a bit more the intuitions, think about slurs, that for a target group, if someone is, I don't know, let's say homosexual, then is this slur, and if someone is this slur, then it's something negative. People use it like this. You know, people, when a slur is used, there is something like this, and it's this two different steps. First, from something is X, then something is blah, and from something is blah, then someone is whatever. But it's not those homosexuals that are also that, because that would be a group. But all of wine to wine, and then from wine something else. So you can derive that if it's wine, it's not British. I don't know if the case of slurs can I don't know, clarify, because it's actual words that people use.
It makes it clear.
Yeah, it seems the closest to concepts that we use regularly. That have this bizarre inference. If you actually stop and think about what the inference pattern is, it's really weird.
Yes. Yeah. Especially, cool. And it's inconsistent because we don't accept the conclusion in the case of slurs, but it's very clear that there is for us that can be an inconsistency, but you can see the steps, the introduction and elimination rules.
Yeah, it's very clear now. Thank you.
So now a second view of what it is to have a concept. Its disposition. So first, Eklund says that being competent with an expression involves being disposed to accept the constitutive principles, let's say. So someone has the concept and if he is disposed to derive or say A and B whenever one is presented with the information that A and the information that B, then there is this disposition to derive A and B or derive B whenever one knows that A and B, etc. The problem for this view of dispositions is what Scharp, so one of the problems, Scharp says, let's consider a person, Otto, who has to possess the concept of Rabel. Rabel is Bein, just another made-up example, and realizes that it is an inconsistent concept. Otto needs to get rid of his dispositions to accept the constitutive principles of Rabel. If Eklund is right that being disposed to accept is the relation between concept possessors and constitutive principles, then Otto no longer possesses the concept once he has eliminated the dispositions, because disposition is having the concept. So Liggins responds, because Liggins defends the same view on dispositions, and he says, well, dispositions can be masked. Glass has a disposition to break, but you can mask the disposition by protecting the glass, and still has a disposition, but there is another, there is a layer that covers it, and the disposition is not lost, but masked. So Eklund need not agree that someone who is aware that they have an inconsistent concept must lose their disposition to accept its constitutive principles. He can claim that they overlay the dispositions with a new disposition that counteracts the original one. Okay, they are inclined to believe the principles, but there is a new thing, a new information that stops them. I want to claim that this is highly problematic. And again, I will just put two different scenarios, we'll present two different scenarios. One is, in this case, using logical vocabulary. So let's assume for this slide that if you have or are convinced that some logic is correct, you endorse that language. Then if you adopt another language, the old language is inconsistent somehow with your new conviction, something like this. So suppose that Otto is a classical logician and he has the right dispositions about classical vocabulary. One day he discovers relevant logic, and convinced about its superiority, Otto changes his way of reasoning. He didn't lose the classical concept, the dispositions to reason according to them have been masked by new relevant dispositions. That's fine, the picture works well, but I don't think it works well in the following scenario. Suppose that Otto is a classical logician, one day he discovers relevant logic, but is not convinced at all that it's a legitimate logic to guide our reasoning. So he doesn't change his initial dispositions, although can understand relevant language. Could we say in this case that Otto acquired new dispositions but have been masked by the classical dispositions? So he had a short new relevant dispositions but masked by these old dispositions. That seems weird because there is a hierarchy between dispositions and a new disposition that mask them. So it only works in one direction. When you learn a logic and are convinced about the new logic, it doesn't work in the direction of, for instance, knowing that one slur exists doesn't make you inclined to reason with the slur. That seems highly problematic. And now you, just by listening to this talk, should be inclined to believe that there are no British wines, although this inclination has been covered immediately by knowing that in fact there are. I don't know how I'm doing with time.
We started very late, so you have 20 minutes.
Yeah, at least 25.
Okay. So, given that I want to be a pluralist about rules that define a concept, I want to argue that all those concepts can be legitimate in the right context. This is not something I say. Also, Liggins argues that, well, bind could be consistent in the right context, etc. So, he just mentions it. I want to make it a bit more, to work a bit more on the details of how a concept could be consistent. In particular, I will argue that inconsistent concepts. So let's assume a very simplified view in which we have a context, and the context can be enriched, new objects enter in the picture, or loosened. We forget about some objects, etc. So once we have an inconsistent concept in some context, then can become consistent in a looser context, and will maintain the inconsistency in a stricter context. And the consistent concept can also become inconsistent. All our concepts that are completely consistent could become, in some context, inconsistent. Just a definition of context would be defined by a language in first order logic. We have variables, connectives. I want to be neutral about which connectives, just arity and m, etc. Predicates and logical and constants for objects in the constant context. And then we have a formula which is defined by just atomic formulas. P is A is P. Applying the connectives unary of binary to two formulas, etc. That's not really important for the intuitions. And we say that a context is defined, is determined by the language chosen and the introduction rules for the properties and for the logical connectives. So both properties and logical connectives have introduction rules I have chosen a Gensen style sequence calculus. And we can say that some symbol in alpha, which is introduced with these two rules that we have here, is non-conservative and inconsistent in those cases in which, well, if we cut alpha in both sides of the sequent, we have a new sequent that could not be derived before the introduction of alpha. If we assume that the consequence relation is reflexive, a particular and salient case sequent that would entail the inconsistency of alpha is just that beta doesn't entail delta, although from beta alpha follows and from alpha delta follows. What is an enrichment of a context? An enrichment of a context is a context in which some valid inference is rejected, which could transform by rejecting this valid inference, a consistent concept becomes inconsistent. An example would be a concept P, which is introduced with these two rules. If something is Q, it's P, and if it's P is T, in a context in which all Q's are T. If a new object is introduced, so the context is enriched, and we introduce a new object which has the property Q but not T, like in the case of bind, then the concept P becomes inconsistent. And if it's discovered that Q and T are in fact not coextensional, as in the case of mass and up above, then the same. However, no enrichment will transform an inconsistent concept or connective into a consistent one, because if the enrichment is just invalidating valid inferences, we will never have the non-conservativity. The loosening, I will skip also this quickly, but we can loosen a context by just adding valid inferences. All Q's are T's, in a context in which that was not supposed, things like this. And then concepts that were inconsistent can become consistent. However, if a concept was consistent, it will remain consistent. Now, just a bit of emphasis. So there is this connection between concept and context, and I want to stress the idea that concepts are defined relative to a context of deducibility, and each context determines which concepts are consistent, and at the same time, each concept determines the set of context, or how the not the set, that's maybe too strong, but determines how some minimal conditions for a context to where the concept will be consistent. And I would like to say, to defend, that in order to possess a concept, one should also understand which are the minimal conditions of those contexts which make the constitutive principles meaningful. So it's not only understanding the principles, but also understanding, grasping those, how the context should be. And this, and with this observation, I go back to the problem of concept possession. So we had this very minimal view. If one possesses the concept, one believes its constitutive principles. This has been modified, making the principle relative to the non-problematic cases. Something like quasi-entitlement of masked dispositions, etc. However, this conditional, which we have to do, we have to conditionalize to non-problematic cases if we want to have something similar to PC, can be done at different levels. At the cognitive level is what we have seen. So if one possesses the concept, one cognitive attitude conditional to non-problematic cases, quasi-entitlement, towards that's a schema for whatever you want to plug here, toward its constitutive principles. However, I want to defend that it could be conditionalized at the level of, at the semantic level. If one possesses a concept, one believes, full stop, no quasi, one believes its constitutive principles which are conditionalized to non-problematic cases. Because conditionalizing at a, sorry, there is a typo. Conditionalize at the cognitive level implies that constitutive principles constitute a concept in all contexts, or at least there is no distinction, and those consequences that we have seen, that one does not believe or endorse definitions of the concepts one possesses. This goes in the direction of a proposal made by Boghossian, and as far as I know, no one else, and many people know, but I've seen that somehow the standard view is to reject the view. But he defended that constitutive principles should be conditionalized in the same constitution principle to the existence of some theory, to the correctness of the theory about that concept. For instance, the constitutive principles for Newtonian mass are: if there is something and physics says that Newtonian mass is, then mass equals the non-kinetic energy. If there is something and physics says that Newtonian mass is, then mass is total energy. This kind of conditional. And this has been criticized by Kevin Scharp. I think that's, Kevin Scharp. It was a very, very short fragment of the book to criticize the idea, but what he says is what he shares is the following intuition. I do not really use a concept according to those conditionalized principles. I use the concept of mass in certain circumstances according to the consequence of those principles, introduction and elimination rules. So the constitutive principles of mass on Boghossian's view do not really say anything about how I use them. However, I would say that this is a counterfactual conditionalized and many times implicit conditional for a concept. It's something like, if we were in context C, or if we are in context C, where C is a context in which the concept is consistent, then if X is P, X is Q, and in the context C, if X is Q, X is T, etc. So one possesses a concept if one believes the constitutive principles, full stop. So one is disposed to reasoning according to the constitutive principles. for P if one would be at C. If we would be in a context in which anything follows, we could reason with TONK, for instance, because in that context TONK would be meaningful. Or if we are in if we were in a classical setting, we could reason with the classical. And then there can be a discussion of whether we are in this or that context. But we can all understand that if we were in such and such context, we could use the language so and so. If a concept is inconsistent in the actual context, the antecedent of the constitutive principles is implicit. And it should be explicit otherwise, in the case of buying. So we avoid the hierarchy between dispositions and what they mask. Although the concept possession is still a disposition, we can grasp concepts that contradict each other, relativized to different contexts. So now, in the case of Otto, when in the first scenario, in which Otto is a classical logician, when he discovers relevant logic and is convinced about the superiority of relevant logic, he changes his way of reasoning, and this change responds to a change of the dispositions because he changes also the context in which he believes we are. And in the new context, we should use the new vocabulary. He still believes that if we were in a classical context, we should reason classically. And in the case of he discovering relevant logic and not being convinced about how to reason with it, he just discovered that if we were in this relevant context, we should use the relevant vocabulary. And just a clarification that this conditional is counterfactual because so even if the antecedent is false, the constitutive principles might not be true. So imagine this dialogue. Someone says, if there were no British wines, that buying applies to exists wine and buying does not apply to if exists British. And someone says, if there were no Scottish or English wines, then constitutive principles for wine. This is false because there could be still Welsh wines. So even if the antecedent is false. Now, very briefly, 2 slides about slurs and 2 notes about truth. So going back to the case of slurs, if we have, let's imagine the Germans are cruel, then we have this concept and first using the concept entails that we are accepting the context. So as using the concept Bosch entails that we assume that Germans are cruel. Of course, those that reject the context still possess the concept for what I said. However, it seems problematic if we say let's just stay in this room in which there is no German that is cruel, so here it's safe to use Bosch. That seems problematic for the case of slurs. And my answer here would be that in those cases, what we should expect for concepts is not that they are world consistent, but modal consistent. Because if we just accept world consistency or situation consistency, we can end up in the problem of essentialization. That is one of the problems that in the theory of slurs have, like assuming that someone is something just because of what he is. My intuition is that would be problematic for Bosch. Wouldn't be problematic for the concept Gertoll. Imagine that something that applies to Germans and does not apply to people shorter than 2 meters. In a situation in which, for whatever reason, Germans, but for an absolutely accidental reason, the Germans that in some situation are taller than 2 meters, in this case, I don't know, maybe you don't share the intuition, but wouldn't seem highly problematic to use the concept in those contexts. And then just so there is this phenomenon in the theory of slurs, that is the reappropriation of a term in which there is a semantic change in which the group targeted by the slur adopts the term and uses it consistently. So using the view, what the view predicts about this phenomena is that by having a slur that is clearly introduced and so has introduction and elimination rules that are problematic, by introducing in a context in which clearly no one would derive the conclusions that the concept entails, one is changing, so the reappropriation changes the constitutive principles by making evident that the concept is now consistent in this context. So it has to change the meaning. It has changed the meaning. And this phenomena seems even more powerful than just rejection of the term, because it redefines it in a way that cannot be used in a derogative way that was used before. I don't know. This is something that I would like to explore more, because I think it's very interesting to see how slurs change their meaning across different contexts. And then finally, in just 2 minutes, so given that this, my interest on those inconsistent concepts started with reading the view of Scharp and Liggins and Eklund that say that truth is an inconsistent concept, I want to briefly say a couple of things. So let's assume, let's have these rules, introduction rules for truth, the non-problematic, so if A, then A is true, and if A is true, then A. We know that with this we derive the paradox, the liar paradox, for instance. And here in this derivation that we have by Ripley, it's a very nice derivation because we have the contraction, cut, and weakening as 3 different structural rules that could be rejected in order to reject the paradox. So what we have in the case of truth that we didn't have with the rest of the concepts is that the liar paradox is avoided in stricter contexts. If the concept of truth was ambiguous, inconsistent, as the rest of the concepts, then it wouldn't be resolved in stricter contexts because this inconsistency would be maintained in the stricter context. It would be only resolved in looser context, but this is not the case for truth. So if truth is an ambiguous, inconsistent concept, its inconsistency could be maintained. However, substructural logic solved the liar paradox, making the concept of truth consistent. So theories of truth as an inconsistent concept, like Scharp and Liggins, require and should make a distinction between the diagnosis of the source of the inconsistency between truth and all the examples used in the literature to say truth is an inconsistent concept, just as TONK and Pi, etc. Because the source of the inconsistency is, I would say, completely different. Just to conclude, going back to the puzzle, we have this concept of wine, and now we can say that Otto possesses the concept of wine. If there were no British wines, then he would have the disposition to apply it correctly to now we are in a context in which there are no chapel down, to a Rioja, or if when offered with a glass of wine, he derives that he is offered a non-British drink, etc. And we have explored all the problems, and I hope I gave an alternative view on what it is to possess this kind of concepts. Thank you.
So I propose we take 5 minutes of break before discussion. Thank you so much.
we're back.
So, questions? Anybody or everybody? Or nobody? Yes.
Yes, I have sort of naive question. It's about this. So you started with this sort of idea of concept possession, and I'm absolutely not familiar with its literature. I'm just curious, why would we need such concept? Like, why we would be interested in saying if, I don't know, agent A possesses or not a concept? Is because we want to sort of substitute it by this understanding a concept, or why? Because it seems to me like a lot of problems arise when we want to infer this, but if we, for example, only limit to applying correctly or incorrectly a concept, many cases become less tricky. Just curious, why would we be interested? Do they sort of, it somehow incorporates in their larger framework?
But why would they become less tricky if someone understands a concept? He should also believe or be inclined. He's not only understanding the constitutive principles, because there has to be something like something stronger. I guess I don't understand why it could be less tricky, or the same problems would apply for understanding a concept. So when you understand a concept, also a test for me to see if you understand, I could take them almost synonymous. I could say I understand the concept is if I understand the constitutive principles, but I don't think that would be correct, because I can understand. I can understand something but reject it and not make the connection with this is connected to my possession of the concept.
So it's like, it seems to me that at least on your sort of view, if we always include some context to the possession of the context, they indeed will be sort of identical. But
yes,
if we don't introduce context, then I just like, so the problem is not that there is something wrong with this idea of concept possession. I can't see like why would be interested to sometimes infer that someone possesses a concept or not. Like, why would we use this notion elsewhere?
but I guess everywhere know that the notion of concept possession is like understanding a concept, testing whether someone is a competent speaker with such and such concept.
Okay, so it's introduced as sort of the similar thing. It was just because I'm not reading this.
I would say so. Yes.
Okay.
Yeah, it's the test for competent speaker
Yeah.
of those concepts, without more mysterious. It's just whether someone is a competent speaker should accept, endorse, believe, be inclined, etc. to these constitutive principles.
I wanted to jump to the other end because I just find this interesting, and stop me if this is an answer that's going to take too long. We can do it over beer later. Your response was really formal. I'm just interested in like, what's the informal sketch of the argument for why you might think that truth is an inconsistent concept? Just is there a way to present this intuition in like 30 seconds, or not really?
No, but for truth is if we have this definition of a concept is inconsistent when the constitutive principles entail that P and P is not the case. So it's as simple as this in Liggins, for instance, in Liggins' work. So if you have a classical logic and you introduce the concept of truth, you construct something like the liar, and then you derive that B follows from it.
I see.
And that is
Okay.
It's not as straightforward as bind, because in that case you derive something about the world that is not the case. In the case of truth, is much more broad. It's like, but that's why I say also that there is this analogy between the inconsistencies
Yeah.
of both
Oh,
concepts.
cool. Okay.
But
Yeah.
It's as simple as that. Yeah.
Cool.
Questions? If not, then I have a question. So, could you? All these examples are like problematic cases of concepts that, when you use them, you can infer something that actually is non-contingent.
Mm-hmm.
Right? So we derive that in slurs, typically, we derive that there's some not completely non-justified information or sentence about people that where we have no arguments for. In the case of Newtonian mass, I mean, we derive things that are simply false physically. But are there examples where you actually want to get some contingent facts that might be true in that context? And so you would not call it an inconsistent object, but it has the same kind of factual import or something, or contingent import. See the point? Like in the sort of harmonic concepts where you have harmonic introduction and elimination rules, you don't have anything you can conclude from by just applying the rules. Whether true or not, there is nothing that you can add to the language, add to your sets of knowledge just by applying the language, let's say. And in some case, clearly we have bad consequences by having non-harmonious concepts, like TONK or like truth or like slurs or like Newtonian mass or whatever. It's many cases where this goes wrong, but given that we are analyzing it as a potentially interesting phenomenon I have the feeling that we also need cases where it goes right.
Like ampliative concepts.
Yeah, concepts where we do get extra information, and that information is actually right. It's true, and it's supposed to be true because it's in that context that we are applying the concept. And
that would be no problematic.
That would be non-consistent, a consistent concept, but it would be a concept that has some that implies some actual facts about the world, right?
Yes.
Because for it to be inconsistent, it has to be false in that context. But if it's true in the context, it's not an inconsistent concept, right? But I would like to know whether there is any example of a case like this. And to me, it seems kind of natural that it would. Like language also always has this unexpected, just preconditions or something, or like. You get what I mean? That there seems to be something that by just speaking a language we affirm certain things, and if those things that we affirm are indeed true, then actually that's good. That our language implies those things.
Would it be an illustration of this? The Hegelian example, if they lived in a flat surface, which they say if this is on top of the other thing, then it's parallel to that line there. And that's non-problematic.
It's non-problematic, but still seems kind of like useless or something. You know, I would like to have an example like Newtonian mass, but then where this in the history of science, for example, ever was the case that the way people use the language, you could infer certain things that are actually true, and so this was actually good usage of a non-harmonious concepts. Because I still get the intuition very strongly that it's just internally wrong to have disharmonious concepts. Whether they lead to truths or falsities is then like...
But we do this all the time. No, for instance, until 50 years ago we could derive that if something is beer, then it has alcohol. Now the concept changed because there are non-alcoholic beers, things like this, and the concept was in fact non-harmonious in this way, but entails something that was not necessary.
I don't know whether that's the case. I think that's probably debatable. Because you might say that beer was a concept, meaning some kind of conjunctive thing made out of, I don't know, grains and being alcoholic and being this and being that. And so in order to, you have to go to a fermentation process and so on. And so you would only introduce it if it's alcoholic, and then you conclude obviously from it that it's, while if we were like entitled before to conclude that it's beer because it has gone through fermentation process and it's based on grain or something, or whatever the definition is, and then from the fact that it's beer we conclude that it's alcoholic.
Mm-hmm.
Well, this was not in it seems kind of wrong. It doesn't seem like to be in the concept at all. It's just something that you infer from it, right? So a pure concept of beer would not have contained that it's alcoholic.
Yeah.
That's something you infer from it, and then it's still harmonious.
Yes.
Even though you conclude that it's
Yes.
So it seems wrong to like eliminate it in a different way than you introduced it intuitively. Whether that leads to correct conclusions or not.
So that would be a criticism to consider the legitimacy of just wall consistent concepts and going for only modal consistent concepts, something like this. It should be necessary also that if something is, so if you introduce and then eliminate, you go from, there should be something that is not accidental in the how things are, but also that it should be like this. So,
yeah,
yes.
that simply you cannot infer anything else by adding the concept to your language. Whether true or not.
I think that's fine. But that's like an extra requirement for the legitimacy of context, and then of concepts, and then the rest. This contextualist view should be more at more possible walls. No, possible walls. No, but possible logics, or like more a pluralistic framework in which. Things could be differently, but not because there could no British wines, but also because also the metaphysics of the wine could be different, something like this.
Mm-hmm.
But I think it's one thing is orthogonal to the other, so we can decide that. Legitimate. So I think there is a graduation between how legitimate the concepts are. If a concept is just wall consistent, well, it's a concept, and maybe it's useful. Maybe it's something like mass. But we should require not only for slurs but in general that concepts are not only wall consistent but modal consistent. But
even stronger than modal consistent, like you really should not conclude anything from your language. But I have a feeling that that's an intuition, and I have a feeling that this is like a sort of very simplistic sort of logical empiricism kind of thing where language has to be neutral or something. And actually, if you're going to look at the way people use concepts, then actually this applies to no language at all, and it's completely not interesting to even start studying it. But then I would expect there to be good examples of cases where people successfully have used these harmonious concepts, or that even that we do it all the time or something like that. I guess I'm looking for cases to convince me that this very sort of idealistic view of oh, we want full harmony and no language should ever have any impact on the world or something like that is actually just false. It's just not achievable at all.
But in the case of logical connectives, for instance, so I didn't talk much about logical connectives, but it's on the background that there is this, so classical connectives are non-conservative in substructural logics, and TONK is non-conservative in classical logic, although we could have a system in which TONK is conservative if we add some crazy structural rule that allows us to derive to transform the logic into trivial. So, yeah, I don't know if I'm answering your question, your worry, but so I guess that's a question for your question. If you would accept this kind of pluralism of context in which different contexts allow different logical, or there is something essential in the logical, in the conjunction that this has to be the conjunction and nothing else, or no, or you are open to this pluralism also, like conjunction in some contexts is consistent, in some contexts is not, the rules are harmonious depending on structural rules.
Yeah, no, so the naive view I try to, well, not defend, but that I actually want to be convinced of why it's wrong, is not pluralistic. It just says, just gives a simplistic idea of these are rules for introducing concepts, these are rules for eliminating concepts, and they should be in harmony always. And that's where we use, where language is used properly. And all the other things are bad, or potentially bad, whether it leads to truths or falsities, independent, like, it's not important. So that's the view that would like have some intuitive appeal because it's simple. It doesn't. It's completely non-pluralistic. I mean, it allows for many languages, but not. It doesn't even come close to inconsistent languages. But I kind of want to be convinced of this being like concrete cases from the history or from language that we use now, where we do have some proper like propositional inputs by the fact that we use the rules of that piece of language, so that it really doesn't make sense to require this strong harmony for each concept. And I guess this is already the case for classical logic or something.
And if you, so if we consider, for instance, the rules for conjunction from A and B, A follows, no, from A, B, A and B, and from A and B, A, that's not conservative and non-harmonious in many logics, so that shouldn't, according to...
Yeah, that would already be excluded.
That's already excluded.
So that's too strict then. But it would be cool to have some example outside of logic, because logic is so, like everything is different for logic. Because in the slur case, it seems like there's something intrinsically wrong by just using the word. All of a sudden, we conclude certain things about people. Yeah. If they are true, these things, that doesn't make it better. If we conclude with a slur that somebody's nice or something, that's also problematic. Like, I don't want to be informed about features of people by just using a word. That seems like. So there probably are cases where we can do this successfully and unproblematically or something. But if you don't have an example, that's fine. I don't want to insist too much on this question. Which is the...
I have the doubt whether many of our concepts, any concept in which, so yeah, of the example I gave with, we can change so this concept, this example I gave of if X is German, then X is, so it applies to X if X is German, and does not apply if is someone shorter than 2 meters. So that's inconsistent, but we could have something similar. So someone is German, and this does not apply if someone is taller than 2 meters and a half, something like this. So all Germans are shorter than 2 meters and a half. Yeah, but just by introducing the concept, we derive this new information that maybe shouldn't be derived because of a concept, but because we studied how. Okay, yeah, I have to think about this because it's.
So it would be nice then to have an example where we actually do things like that, and it's perfectly fine, and we ought to. This is actually a strength of language that we can derive such things and so on. Like that, it seems to be very much, this kind of example is very good because it seems to be counter to some very strong intuitions of logical empiricism, that we have some things that we can observe about the world, and then things that we can analytically infer, and this is not something that we should be able to analytically infer that Germans are less tall than about 2.5 meters. We should actually go look at things like Germans specifically, where they have this size.
And I think Boghossian goes in this direction, and assuming that just by introducing a new concept, you shouldn't be able to derive, even if the concept is truth-preserving, you shouldn't derive things about the world just because you have this new concept. But this is on this distinction that maybe I should focus a bit more on, this distinction between world consistent and model consistent. Yeah, thanks. I have to think about this because there is more to say about what do we expect of concepts, of the constitutive rules for concepts. I need to think about this. Yeah.
Thanks. Other questions?
I was looking at the German and Bosch thing in the slides, and so the problem is that we have a concept, we can derive a concept from it, and then we also have another concept that we can derive it from that one. So we have German, if someone in German is Bosch, and we also have is cruel, and then Bosch is cruel. And so, in a way, if we, in classical logic, wouldn't we think that we have to not use that concept then, or this concept is invalid or something? Because it is kind of this reasoning is kind of showing a contradiction. And so if we were doing a proof ad absurdum, we would kind of be inclined of changing some of the premises of something in there.
I think that's the problem of the. So we shouldn't use this kind of concepts precisely because of.
I was trying to see how a classical logician would react to it. I tried to think it, and so I was this seems can be constructed almost like a proof ad absurdum, and then we should probably change some of the premise or the definition of the concept that we're using or something. Maybe we should, I don't know, maybe someone in classical logic could argue that we have to then include in Bosch that he's cruel from the beginning, and then we'll take only the cruel German. And doing a union between those two characteristics from the beginning, and then saying that it's actually a wrong way of reasoning to do it in 2 steps.
But I think that that's okay. Yeah. So making it just a concept of those Germans that are cruel or something like this.
Then we just didn't define properly Bosch. Then we just redefine Bosch and saying like every Bosch we now understand because we saw a contradiction that like now every Bosch are like cruel German.
Then would be a different concept. There would be a change in the meaning of the concept, and that's precisely how slurs work. No, that you apply it to all of all the members of certain community in order to conclude the negative thing. But yeah, I guess there has to be a revision. I don't know if the revision, I don't really understand that the revision should be in the classical logic revision. It's more like it's a problem in the definition.
I guess that like usually like when we do a classical proof ad absurdum, we like taking all the premises that we have, we going towards it, and then we find out that like something is like contradicting the premises at the beginning, and then we try to like say that something was false at the beginning. So I guess if we define Bosch as just German, then we do all the reasoning that we can do, and we end up somehow with like Bosch is cruel. Then that means that we probably like have done something wrong at the beginning.
Yeah, but this something wrong is not a step that was wrong, but just the introduction and elimination rules of the concept is what is wrong.
Okay.
Yes. I don't know, I have to think.
And you think we cannot like that would mean that those concepts cannot be like just redefined. We should keep them as thus. I mean, like that Bosch should only be defined as just German, and that's it. And then we like. I guess like now I kind of understand what I'm saying. So we shouldn't define Bosch actually as cruel German because we're not doing this from the beginning. So I guess that's the problem of all of this. It's like from the beginning the thing cannot be defined simply by cruel German. Like cruel German seems too much for a definition for Bosch, I guess. Then we only define it as German because we're not using it as cruel German all the time.
No, it's used for Germans.
Yeah.
For all of them. And then
at one point sometimes it happens that it happens that Bosch are used for cruel Germans.
No, but it's used for all of them. So
but the first definition was useful in the beginning, so yeah.
It was useful in the context in which there was the prejudice. So it's useful, given the particular context, then the concept makes sense for people with the prejudice.
Okay.
And the transformation. So, and what I wanted to say about the transformation is that there is this phenomenon of the reappropriation of the concept. So imagine the Germans decide that happens to start using the concept, and via the change of the context in which it's obvious that in that context the consequences are not accepted. So there has been a change of there has to be a change of the constitutive principles, otherwise it doesn't make sense that in this context the concept is meaningful and used.
So we kind of have that problem every time we have like a concept that we define once, and then someone redefine it along the way. We would destroy the first thing the first definition that we were doing. I guess.
This happens a lot with certain concepts. Like with time, get some connotation, and then it has to be substituted by another concept because the old one got all these connotations, and then this happens again and again.
So every time you don't substitute that concept, that happens in a way. I guess. So every time the first definition still remains somehow. That's a lot of cases, I guess, historically.
in which there is no...
I guess there's like, if we would just completely change the definition at one point, we wouldn't have that problem. For the case of the Bosch and the Germans, because like first we use Bosch like neutrally, and then somewhere along the way we change the definition, but we still like keep the first one, and so there's like kind of two competing definitions that exist for Bosch.
I see. So it's like adding a connotation to a concept that applies neutrally to a group, and given that the connotation is added, an elimination rule is also accepted for the concept, and then there has been a change in the definition. In fact, something that for me is interesting about this is to see how, I guess, different concepts has had different stories, and different slurs had different stories and different changes. Some slurs are rejected by the community, some slurs are reappropriated by the community, some slurs disappeared. So this kind of phenomenon and the interaction between the concept and the context is something that for me is interesting. I don't know much about the bibliography on slurs, but it's something that interests me based on these things, and see how all this literature and all this phenomenon that happens with the slurs could fit in the picture. But
I guess that's what happened with barbar. Like barbar at first is just blah 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 blah. Yes.
Yes.
And now when we say something's barbaric, it's like completely different from just being a foreigner or not being Greek.
That's a good example.
Yes. So then I put this example only from the slur already negative to the reappropriation, but in fact the story would if we go some time before, so there is the neutral to the negative, and then maybe the reappropriation, maybe not, and that's a nice story. Yes. Okay. Yes. Thanks. Yes.
I'll do one more quick one. So man, no, this is mostly I'm trying to think about how I would object if I were one of the people on who has one of these other views. And I guess one thing that I might be worried about, and I'm sure you've thought about this. I'm just interested to hear your responses. I mean, you might just be fundamentally kind of allergic to making concepts context sensitive in this way, right? I mean, I wonder. I guess, one response is just to say, yeah, well, but look, I mean, we want to solve the inconsistent concept problem. The only way that seems like it's going to work to do it is you got to make them context sensitive. That's all you're so sorry. Like, that's the argument. I mean, that's a perfectly reasonable response, but I can still see kind of digging in my heels here and saying, like, look, though, like math, Newtonian math is like this, like, whether you would, like, regardless of, it's sort of a more transcendental fact than that. It's kind of a context-free problem. I don't know. Is there a reason? Is there a reasonable objection back there somewhere?
Yeah, I guess there is. I thought about and Boghossian also discusses this. Like this, what if someone says, no, my concept of TONK is this introduction and elimination rules and full stop. He says, well, these are not legitimate concepts, and given this particular view on the context, I would say something like, if you want to introduce a concept and you use indexicals, for instance, for the concept, I would say, you are not really succeeding in doing what you are thinking you are doing, because in the moment that you introduce a concept, it's linked to a minimal condition for the context in which it's meaningful, and like an indexical, you need something something out there that gives meaning to those. That would be my first reaction to this objection. But I think it's a legitimate objection. It's something that I should take seriously, because that could be a problem. But I think my response would go in this direction. Like,
sure.
And I have this intuition.
You already do that, whether you think you do or not.
Yes.
You actually, we do this regularly, and we are normally okay with it. Yeah, that's a nice answer. Yeah.
If you have the concept TONK, It's because somehow you are understanding those trivial situations in which it operates. I don't know if it's a good response, but it's a response. I need to think more about this. But yeah, that's a fair comment.
Thanks for the presentation.
Thanks for all your comments.
So,
Yeah.
I guess we